In today's video, we dive into a chilling, unresolved mystery that has kept an entire town in suspense for years. This is the gripping tale of a brutal murder that shook a peaceful community to its core. It shattered a loving family and left law enforcement with more questions than solutions. This is the story of Janet Brown, whose case remains unresolved 3 decades later, and the relentless quest for justice that continues without end. On April 11, 1995, a Tuesday morning, contractor Nick Marshall and his son arrived at a large farmhouse in Radnage, a quaint village nestled in the English countryside of Buckinghamshire. The farmhouse sat back from the road on Spriggs Holly Lane. They were scheduled to begin remodeling the house, a typical job for a Tuesday that should have gone smoothly. But as Nick approached the house, he sensed something was amiss. The sharp wail of a burglar alarm pierced the calm morning atmosphere, disrupting the tranquility of this rural setting. It was unusual for an alarm to still be blaring this late in the morning. Hours after it had been activated, it became evident that something was wrong and no one had silenced it. Nick moved in closer to one of the windows and looked inside. Hoping for a straightforward explanation, his anxiety intensified with every step. He would forever remember what he witnessed through that window. A woman lay motionless at the base of the staircase. She was 51 years old and her name was Janet Brown. Nick immediately called for assistance, his hands trembling as he recounted what he had observed. Radnage, a once tranquil village, was about to be thrust into the spotlight of one of the most bizarre and unsettling murder cases in British history. To fully understand the horrifying events of that night, we need to first learn about who Janet Brown was and why her death seemed so senseless. Those who knew Janet described her as kind, gentle, and compassionate. She was born in Southampton. These weren't mere platitudes uttered after a tragic event. She lived her life embodying these qualities, choosing a career path inspired by her character. She became a midwife and dedicated her life to helping others. Eventually, she transitioned to a role as a research nurse for Oxford University in the Public Health and Primary Care Department. At the renowned John Radcliffe Hospital, she was the kind of person who spent her days uplifting others and making them feel better. Friends and family who knew her well remarked that Janet was serene and appreciated the small joys in life. She relished exploring new places, traveling, and enjoying the great outdoors. These pursuits were vital to a woman who cherished life in all its splendor. The man Janet was married to was Graham Brown, who worked in the pharmaceutical industry. Their 3 children were the center of their lives: Zara, Hardin, Roxanne, and Benedict. Janet was deeply devoted to her family. Zara, her daughter, went to London for her first job after graduating from college. She would later express that her mother was always there for them, especially during Graham's work trips. Benedict was off pursuing his degree and was 21 at the time. Roxanne, who was just 17, still lived at home. The Brown family's home was distinctive. The farmhouse stood secluded on an 11-acre property far from the hustle and bustle of urban life. In the morning, you could hear the birds chirping, and at night, the stars were vividly visible. Spriggs Holly Lane led up to the land. This winding country road was known only to those well acquainted with the area. You wouldn't just happen upon this house. You should have been aware of its presence, but recently a series of break-ins had plagued the neighborhood, tainting this serene location. Janet had grown increasingly worried about safety as she prioritized her family's well-being. She refused to take any chances. She joined the neighborhood watch program and took on the role of its leader. She also had security alarms installed in every room of the house. This woman took these steps because she wanted her family to feel secure in their own home. That very same woman was now found lifeless at the foot of her stairs. Let's rewind to 24 hours earlier on Monday. On April 10, 1995, and piece together Janet's final day. Like any other day, Janet went to her job at the John Radcliffe Hospital. That morning, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. After her shift, she bid farewell to her coworkers and headed out to locate her Volvo in the parking structure. She was all set to drive home. Her family had just listed the house for sale, and an offer had been accepted. It felt as if everything was on the verge of change and that new beginnings were just around the corner. Plans had shifted at the last moment back at home. Initially, Roxanne and a friend intended to stay in with her mother that evening. But around 3:30 in the afternoon, Roxanne decided to leave the house to celebrate with a friend who had just obtained their driver's license. It was a spontaneous choice, the type that teenagers often make. The mother of Roxanne's friend was concerned about her daughter traveling such a distance right after passing her test, which led to new arrangements. Graham was away working in Switzerland at the same time. Due to these circumstances, Janet would be left home alone that night, which wasn't very unusual. However, that night would change everything for them. Around 8 o'clock that evening, one of Roxanne's friends phoned Janet. This turned out to be the last time anyone could confirm speaking to her while she was still alive. 20 minutes later, around 8:20, Nick Marshall, a family contractor, placed a call to discuss the upcoming work. There was no response. Graham attempted to reach her again from Switzerland at 9 o'clock, but again there was no reply. Janet usually picked up the phone, but this time she did not. Around 10:10 that night, a friend drove past the Brown house and heard the alarm blaring. The piercing sound echoed across the tranquil countryside. The friend returned by the house later, and the external alarm had stopped ringing. It had gone off for about 20 minutes before silencing itself. However, from within the house, the alarm continued blaring incessantly. It was shocking how brutal the crime was and what could have provoked it. When the police arrived at the scene on Tuesday morning, this combination of events would continue to baffle investigators for decades. Janet was found at the foot of the stairs, her body arranged in a manner that told a terrifying story. Brown packing tape was tightly bound around her mouth and nose, and her hands were shackled behind her back. The walls and ceiling were splattered with blood, providing clear evidence of a vicious attack. Authorities suspect she was repeatedly struck with what they believe might have been a hammer or another heavy object, leading to severe head injuries. The weapon, whatever it turned out to be, has never been located, even though extensive searches of the land and surrounding areas have been conducted. Janet had been restrained and gagged while completely naked. Yet a forensic evaluation found no evidence of a sexual assault, and investigators do not believe there was a sexual motive behind her death. This fact alone added to the strangeness of the case. If the murderer wasn't targeting something personal, what was the objective? Janet's clothing was neatly folded and placed beside her bed in her upstairs bedroom. Her nightgown lay on the floor nearby. These details painted a picture of Janet preparing for bed, following her usual evening routine when she was startled awake by an intruder. Signs throughout the house indicated that the killer had thoroughly searched the premises. Drawers had been opened, items had been scrutinized, and rooms had been meticulously inspected. Surprisingly, however, it appeared that nothing of value had been taken. That meant no jewelry, cash, or other belongings. What exactly was the thief hoping to find? If this was a break-in, why would they brutally kill someone without taking anything? Investigators quickly noted how the entry was gained, which was quite odd. The assailant had utilized cutting tools to attempt to create an opening in the back door. This was not a straightforward smash-and-grab incident. Specialized tools had been brought in by someone to carefully slice through the glass. However, it seemed that the plan had ultimately failed. Special instruments were introduced by an individual to meticulously slice through the glass. Yet it seems that strategy failed to succeed. The assailant forcefully shattered the second panel of the patio door in the serene countryside. The sound would have been deafening, especially if anyone was inside the home. There's no logical reason for someone to quietly try to slice through glass, only to break it afterward. Were they rushing? Did their scheme fall apart? The perpetrator was equipped with tape and handcuffs, indicating this was premeditated. These items weren't just taken during a botched burglary. It was orchestrated by someone who brought restraints and gagging equipment along. But what was their motive? Detective Superintendent Martin Short, who had dedicated 28 years to the police force, declared he had never encountered a case like this before. This situation differed greatly from typical burglaries or murders due to its bizarre circumstances. The investigators were able to pinpoint the timeline of Janet's murder. Based on the phone calls and the alarm activation, the call came in around 8 in the morning and she answered it. There was no response from her between 8:20 and 9. The doctor arrived around 10:10. The alarm was reported to have gone off between 8:15 and 10:15 at night during that crucial 2-hour window when Janet Brown was murdered. One of the 2 buttons installed in the house triggered the panic alarm. One was located next to Janet's bed on the second floor, while the other was near the front door on the first floor. However, the fact that she triggered the alarm implies she had a fleeting opportunity to summon help despite being under attack. Authorities were uncertain which button she managed to press. The ensuing investigation was extensive. Law enforcement was determined to prevent this case from going cold. In their relentless pursuit for answers, forensic teams from the police meticulously searched the surrounding grounds and fields with their bare hands. Every corner of the expansive property was examined for clues. Investigators meticulously scoured the house for fingerprints, fibers, DNA, and any other traces that could lead them to the culprit. The police investigated over 2,500 leads, gathering nearly 2,000 statements from individuals who might have witnessed or heard anything unusual. This included neighbors, friends, family, co-workers, and anyone else in the vicinity. The police canvassed the area. Knocking on doors and posing questions to residents, they asked, "Have any of you spotted a peculiar car or individual around here?" Every detail, no matter how insignificant, had the potential to break the case wide open. The days following Janet's death were surreal for her family. Later, Roxanne recalled visiting the grocery store, where she encountered rows upon rows of newspapers showcasing her mother's picture on the front pages. The private tragedy had evolved into a public spectacle, and everyone bore witness to their heartbreak. Like many others left behind, Roxanne grappled with an overwhelming sense of shame that night. She and her friend were supposed to be at Janet's house. Would her mother still be alive if they had been? Would more people have frightened off the intruder, or would there have been more victims? This haunting what if lingers with those who mourn. Following the tragedy, the autopsy revealed the horrifying nature of Janet's final moments. She had endured numerous blows to the face with significant force. Markings on her body indicated she had been restrained and compelled to lie on her back. The pressure around her nose and mouth was so severe that investigators believed she would have succumbed to suffocation within minutes, even if the head injuries hadn't been fatal. The assailant took approximately 30 seconds to traverse from the upstairs bedroom to the shattered back door. This is where the confrontation unfolded, where Janet encountered her murderer. A small piece of tape indicative of a struggle in the bedroom was discovered on the floor. The killer's cold-heartedness was exemplified by the finding of the handcuff key beneath Janet's body. They had restrained her and then left the key there, an ultimate act of disrespect. The killer lingered in the house, despite the alarms blaring throughout. They didn't flee in panic immediately after the murder. Rather, they stayed to carefully ransack the home. It was determined that the perpetrator had washed their hands somewhere inside the house and returned upstairs as the blood on the bedroom light switches was not thick. It was discovered that the murderer had cleaned their hands in the house before returning upstairs, as the blood on the bedroom light switches was not substantial. The individual involved was composed enough to tidy up while Janet lay nearby, either fading away or already gone. Everything surrounding this case contradicted common perceptions. Typically, burglars avoid confrontation by targeting vacant houses where they can slip in unnoticed. Nevertheless, this assailant attempted to break into a home that had its lights on, clearly indicating that someone was present. What was the purpose of such a risky move? The entry point was equally perplexing. Why attempt to meticulously slice through glass, only to shatter it noisily? Why bring restraints to a burglary? Furthermore, it remains unclear why someone would be so brutally harmed, and yet nothing was taken. These confrontations seem to suggest more than mere theft. Was someone searching for a specific item? Was this an assault on an individual disguised as a burglary? Or was there another motive that eluded the police when examined collectively? The items in question appeared bizarre. A weapon, restraints, adhesive tape, and tools for glass cutting. In February of 1996, the police launched a crime watch to present some evidence, including a peculiar weather-resistant toile that had been applied to the window. This was not your typical adhesive tape. It was a specialized product used for clothing in greenhouses. In that specific year, only 300 rolls were distributed to the surrounding region. Someone had to have recalled that. These unusual items were sold together: a glass-cutting knife, weather-resistant tape, and chains. This combination might trigger a memory for someone. During the appeal, Detective Superintendent Short made a significant statement. The killer must have been drenched in blood due to the struggle leaving them covered in it. They likely cleaned themselves up somewhere. Someone may have witnessed something peculiar 10 months after Janet's murder. The police received 2 messages on an answering machine from a man who remained anonymous. Investigators were convinced that these calls were legitimate. Based on the content and tone of the messages, this individual appeared to possess genuine information that could prove crucial to the investigation. The police urged this unidentified caller to step forward to reach out and to share what he knew, but he never did. The man was never heard from again, and to this day, his identity remains a mystery. How did he possess that knowledge? Why did he attempt to make contact? What prevented him from following through? By June of 1996, over a year after Janet's passing, a 47-year-old man faced murder charges. The public never discovered his identity. The Woburn Green police interrogated him, but the lead went nowhere. Like all the previous ones in this challenging case, the man was ultimately released, and the investigation continued to progress at an agonizingly slow pace. For the Brown family, April 10, 1995 felt like the end of their world. Although time usually aids in healing, it offered no comfort while the killer remained at large and justice was nowhere in sight. Zara experienced panic attacks and often woke at night straining to hear any sounds, terrified of a potential break-in. The family never returned to the Spriggs Holly Lane residence. How could they? It was no longer a home. It had become the site of their mother and wife's brutal murder. Too many painful memories and fresh wounds lingered there. Roxanne moved in with Sarah in London and took the train back to Buckinghamshire to complete her A-levels. The family grew increasingly concerned for their safety, installing grills on all their doors and windows. They no longer felt secure, a sentiment most people take for granted. Janet had been calm, kind, and gentle. It had been dark and she was alone that night. Why did someone feel compelled to inflict such cruelty and violence upon her? She couldn't defend herself as she was restrained. There was no reasonable justification for the degree of violence used against her. Her family found it utterly baffling. As time passed, the case became less intriguing as the intensive investigation began to wane. New leads dwindled. Yet in 2015, 2 decades after Janet's death, a breakthrough finally emerged that reignited hope. It was time for the Major Crime Investigation Review Team to revisit how Janet lost her life 20 years prior. There had been no advancements in investigative techniques. Forensic scientists were given items from the original crime scene that were now accessible, allowing them to be re-examined. Utilizing advanced DNA technology, they succeeded. They discovered DNA that belonged to someone else. This DNA didn't belong to the Brown family. It could potentially be the killer's DNA found at the crime scene. 30 years later, it was finally identified using state-of-the-art science. However, the DNA profile did not match anyone in the police database, which contained over 6 million entries. This revelation was both frustrating and captivating. Since the killer had not been apprehended for any other major crimes, his DNA couldn't be collected and stored. He might have been deceased or living overseas at the time of the crime. While the profile was a valuable asset for law enforcement, it could not directly assist them in identifying the killer without a match. Detective Chief Inspector Peter Bierney refrained from disclosing the source of the DNA, but did make urgent appeals to the public. "There is someone out there who knows who murdered Janet," he declared. "Someone has insights, details, or memories that could help bring closure to this case." With DNA evidence, police could connect or dismiss suspects by simply testing names. DNA tests excluded more than 1,000 men. This monumental effort demonstrated the seriousness of the police in resolving the case, yet the identity of the killer remained a mystery. Janet's children made a heartfelt public appeal in 2015. Their words carried the weight of 20 years filled with grief and lingering questions. "The brutal murder of our mother was premeditated," they expressed. "The horror of her death is something we carry with us every day." Our family home, where we should feel secure, became the site of her murder. Thames Valley Police now possess new DNA evidence that could assist in finding her killer. But we need your help to locate them. They urged anyone with information to step forward, even if it seemed trivial or insignificant. Many loved and cherished Janet, and her death shattered their hearts. Time did not diminish the pain, it only intensified it. Over the years of awaiting justice that never arrived, Crime Stoppers offered a reward of up to $20,000 for any information leading to an arrest. Thames Valley Police encouraged individuals to come forward even if they believed the person they were searching for had passed away, as DNA samples from family members could be used to match the criminal's profile found at the scene. Now we arrive at the present day. It has been over 30 years since Janet Brown was murdered in her own home. The rolling fields of Buckinghamshire remain as tranquil and quiet as they were before the tragic events unfolded, but a significant question still looms over that serene landscape. Who was responsible for Janet Brown's death? When Roxanne was attacked, she was in her 40s, and the experience changed her life forever. She remains cautious around people in certain situations and constantly worries about her safety. She doesn't run alone in the woods or the countryside. There's always someone who knows her whereabouts because of her vigilance. These scars from her mother's unsolved murder affect more than just the victim. They impact everyone close to that individual. Researchers are now more equipped than ever